Welcome to Glass Houses, a Billy Joel podcast. I'm Michael Grosvenor.
And I'm Jack Fernino. Join us as we dig deep into Billy Joel's songs and history and what his music has meant to us.
Thank you. Good evening, Las Vegas. This is a nice venue. Welcome to Allegiant Stadium. And I hope you have many years of successful football here. I am an Oakland Raider fan. But now I like the Las Vegas Raiders. Who cares?
2022 is turning out to be a big year for Billy Joel. Just by the end of February, fans enjoyed a unique weekend of music in a city where Billy doesn't often play. And new vinyl releases expanding on last year's box set include an album few fans have ever owned on vinyl before.
We're covering these events in this episode while also looking at a much quieter, often overlooked point in Billy's career, his 2008 tour of Australia, New Zealand, and Japan.
By the end of the new century's first decade, Billy's career appeared to be winding down. It had been 7 years since his last release of new music and 15 since his last pop album, and his tour schedule was dwindling with fewer dates each year.
Billy would hit the road again with Elton John in 2009. For this year, however, fans would only get a handful of television appearances and a run of tour dates on the other side of the world from his home on Long Island.
He'd still be years away from the Garden residency that fueled a renewed interest in his live performances and a critical reassessment of his place in pop culture history. For those keeping score 14 years ago, it may have looked like his number was up.
But, as we've seen just by the news this year, Billy still had a lot to offer.
Join us as we recap the last few weeks of Billy Joel news and dig deeper into his 2008 tour.
Well, we're back with another late-breaking news / hodgepodge sort of an episode. So this time around, we've got some great updates from Michael in particular, who's been on top of all the latest happenings. And then we'll dive into sort of a low-key year, which was 2008. But first, we're looking at current events. The tailor-made for Michael Grosvenor Metallica and Billy Joel weekend in Las Vegas. Are you a gambling man, Michael? Was this like a trifecta, or was 2 out of 3 good enough?
You know, I should have put some money down because, man, luck was on my side for this event to happen at all, I tell you what.
Yeah, really. Should have at least played the lotto.
Seriously, I never in my life did I think that all of that would align to come together. In fact, I may have mentioned it when we talked about it being announced back in November or October that had it been only one of the two, I wouldn't have made the trip because, you know, I've seen them both a lot and they're just kind of one-off shows. But as soon as they both announced, my wife Jen, she looked at me, she's like, okay, we have to figure this out because this will never happen again.
So a whole weekend and possibly a kidney or two later on the black market.
I spent the couple months leading up to it selling some, duplicates in my collection and, selling a couple old iPods that I had lying around and just scraping up together some extra cash just to make it happen. But somehow it worked. And yeah, man, it was a whirlwind. I was literally there for essentially a day and a half. It was a lot of fun.
My first question, because, obviously I wasn't there. Did you get the impression that there were a sizable number of people at both shows?
Yeah, so both shows were at the same venue, which was Allegiant Stadium, which is the football stadium that's fairly new that the Raiders play at. It's about a 55-ish, 60,000 capacity for concerts. Metallica was officially considered a sold-out show. Billy was not, but I tell you what, by showtime, it was absolutely packed in there, so they filled the room.
Did anybody mention the other band during their set? Like, was there a acknowledgement of the magnanimous doubleheader this particular weekend?
No, I'm actually kind of bummed that neither of them mentioned the other at all. I know it's like promoters and management who are in charge of promoting these type of things, but it would have been cool to hear James mention Billy or Billy mention Metallica, but none of that happened. The only reference I saw the whole weekend was the morning that Metallica loaded in for sound check. I guess there was the Raiders, or they'll paint like on one of the main walls backstage. It'll say like, welcome Metallica, welcome whatever. And it said welcome Metallica and Billy Joel right next to each other. Kirk Hammett posed for a photo in between this big painting with his thumbs up. And it says, now that's a show. Hello, Las Vegas. And then he used the hashtag heavy metal piano man.
So they were trying to get something trending at least. I guess we'll indulge you for once. Tell us how the Metallica show was.
Here we go. I actually get to talk about a Metallica show with a little bit of detail. They had two openers. One was a band called Ice Nine Kills, which I did not see. And then the other was Greta Van Fleet, which is a band out of Michigan that have definitely like that Led Zeppelin 70s rock vibe. And they put on actually a pretty high energy show. And I know a lot of metal fans don't really dig them, but I thought they were a lot of fun. And Metallica came out swinging. They opened the show with Whiplash, so that's how the night started.
Ooh.
Yeah, they did Whiplash and Ride the Lightning to kick off the show, and just two high energy thrashers to come out of the gate. And Metallica's not in mid tour right now. They did the 40th anniversary shows in December, which I was at, but that's been it since. And so this was certainly a one-off for them. It was a lot of fun. The show itself, set list wise, was very much a greatest hits show, so to speak.
Right.
Aside from those two to kick it off, but it was, you go through the set list. I'm not gonna, it's only 16 songs. I'll just rattle it off. They did Whiplash, Ride the Lightning, Memory Remains, Seek and Destroy, Yule, One, Sabbath True, Moth into Flame, Wherever I May Roam, For Whom the Bell Tolls, Creeping Death, Fade to Black, Master of Puppets, and then the encore of Battery, Nothing Else Matters, and Inner Sandman.
That's almost daring in a way. Having never been to see Metallica, putting Sandman at the end, I feel like that would just piss off everybody. There's gonna be some people waiting to hear it, and then there's gonna be people like, I'm an old school fan. I don't want to leave that. That's not the taste I want in my mouth. Leaving,
Yeah, it's funny. A lot of the old school fans are like, Nothing Else Matters than Sandman to end the show. It's like, when Billy would end every show with, Piano Man, and everyone's like, oh, really again? And,
yeah.
So there's definitely a lot of that. And trust me, Metallica fans bitch about the set list just as much as Billy fans. But see, the difference is every couple of years, Metallica is still putting out new albums. So things get shuffled every 5-6 years because they introduce some actual new material. I was spoiled at the 40th anniversary shows with a lot of rare and deep cuts, and this didn't really have them, but I can't complain. I've seen them. This was, I think, show 15, and they just brought it. High energy from top to bottom. They were visibly in a good mood. Like, you could tell that they just are so relieved to be back out playing and doing all of that. Everyone was joking and having a good time, and being a one-off show, it wasn't an elaborate stage production either, which was kind of cool because Metallica is one band that has done very elaborate and unique stage setups, but they don't need it. It does enhance the show, but they can also just go up there on a bare stage and play.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it was. It was literally a plain stage. Lars's drums were on a riser that they literally rolled out 20 minutes before their set. And they had 4 white cabinets with the Metallica M on either side of Lars. And then they had about 6 vocal mics that lined the front of the stage. And that was about it.
Well, I would imagine part of that has to be just the ease of swapping out 2 different shows that quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And to that point, Billy and Metallica actually shared the same basic stage. They had the same basic deck. It was Billy's standard stadium setup with the tiered stage and that the kind of the curved front with his piano that rotates and the whole bit. It was his normal production. Anytime you've seen him in a baseball stadium the last several years, it was all there. But the bones of the stage were the same for both nights.
So Metallica didn't have that like in the round thing they do, where like they're more in the middle of the arena.
Correct. Yeah, they do that typically just in arenas. When they did their last album tour, it was an end stage setup, but they also had a snake pit with ramps that came out to a point and then a bit of the crowd in the middle of it all. They didn't do anything like that this go around. It was just the straight stage. But man, I tell you what, you forget sometimes how big football stadiums are until you see it filled with people, like the floor filled with people.
Yeah.
During Metallica, we had a lower level seat as well, and you could just see different sections of the floor, different pits starting during different songs. And it was just a sea of movement all night. It was wild.
So from there, let's jump into Billy now. I feel like it's an obvious question, but what was the change in atmosphere from Metallica to Billy? And you know why? I think it's not as silly as a question as it would be sort of anywhere but Vegas, because Vegas is such a tourist place. Was the vibe closer than you would think between the two shows in a city like that?
I would say the Billy show definitely trended older in crowd and more reserved. The majority of the crowd felt like a typical middle-aged Billy Joel show where a lot of people sitting and the occasional pockets of people standing up and dancing at their seat. I will say, I'm fairly involved in the Metallica fan community, and there was a lot of people who went to both shows. So we saw a handful of Metallica shirts at the Billy show. A lot of people, I think, were already coming for Metallica and were, maybe not necessarily a Billy fan, but we're like, hey, the next night Billy's there. This is the best chance to check out a Billy show. Right. And I tell you what, a lot of those people he won over. There's a thread in the Metallica message board where about the Vegas show, and the last 2 days it's been all Billy talk, where everyone's like, holy shit, I never knew how good, how funny he was and what a good live show it was. And I mean, classic song after classic song. He blew people away, which was really cool.
That's so funny because, obviously we spend so much time on the Retold page. Not to say people are ungrateful by any means, but, we get the bickering about the set lists. It's refreshing to hear when you get that cross-pollination and you see why and how that formula works. Like how many more people now are a little into Billy.
I think he won over some new Metallica people, which was really cool to see. And, I actually guested on Metal Up Your Podcast last week, which is actually yesterday as the date of the recording. I literally hopped on a call 15 minutes after I walked in the door from the airport. So I was chatting with Ethan about it. I think what it is, it's like, Metallica is one of those bands that stands above a lot of them. They have such good songs. Their songs are so good.
Yeah.
And Billy, Billy's like that too. So I think there's that through line where a lot of people could respect that, in both bands. Over the course of these 2 nights, you saw 40 classic songs by two of the biggest and best to ever do it.
Is Metallica the Billy Joel of metal? Can we say that now? Is that the, who's coming close? Slayer's done. Anthrax never made it as big. Testament never made it as big.
And neither did Megadeth.
Yeah, Megadeth never did. half of Pantera's passed away now.
Well, I think David Ellefson from Megadeth, he put it best. He's like, everyone talks about the big four, which is Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, and Anthrax. He's like, but come on, let's be honest. It's Metallica and everybody else. Metallica was the band that definitely had the broadest appeal. And, they're, as a result, they're one of the biggest selling artists ever.
So as far as the Billy show goes, what was your impression of that audience? I mean, at the Garden shows, all the retolders are behind the stage. And you're a great person to ask because you've seen Billy in quite a few different cities,
Right.
kind of across the nation. How was the Vegas crowd in comparison to anywhere but New York? Like New York's the outlier.
The crowd was into it. Really great crowd from the get-go. I didn't know what to expect. I mean, most of the shows, especially up until I moved out west, I saw of Billy's were in the Detroit area. And see, Detroit is kind of like an outlier too, because they also have like a notoriously good rock and roll crowd. Mm-hmm. And so the Detroit crowds that Billy played were always incredible. So having seen a lot of Detroit and a handful of the New York shows, I've seen some of the, most diehard and energetic crowds. And this was up there, I tell you. And for a such a big venue too, it's really hard to make it feel small. And it didn't feel like it was a huge, giant stadium in a lot of ways. Mm-hmm. It was just a really good, intimate show, good engagement with the audience, and just the crowd just really, out of the gate, loved it.
I haven't actually looked. What did we get any surprises on this set list? We almost got Captain Jack, as we found out, right?
Yeah. So Billy's social media people posted the set list a day or two after the show. And we noticed Captain Jack was on there and crossed out. So we nearly got Captain Jack, and that would have been great because I haven't seen that song live in a long time.
That's what a lot of people were saying, especially to think he would take it out in Vegas too.
Probably the song I've seen live the least that made its way into the set list was Say Goodbye to Hollywood. He's been playing that a lot in recent years, actually, a handful of times, and obviously more so lately with Ronnie Spector passing away. There's that connection. I was actually looking at the Setlist FM stats for it. Granted, those aren't always complete by any stretch of the imagination, but, he's played it on the low end 3 times, on the high end 11 times a year since 2014. Mm-hmm. But prior to 2014, he last played it live in 1982.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So pretty much the Nylon Curtain, up until when he started the Garden residency, he didn't play Say Goodbye to Hollywood at all.
And that really aches to be played in the big hall too, I think.
Oh yeah, just with that, that big open backbeat, and it sounded really good in a big room like this, and just overall, Billy sounded really good. His voice is just in tip-top shape these days, and he was clearly having a good time. Now, I've seen a handful of shows, in the last 20 years, and none of them have been terrible by any stretch of the means. But there have been some times where just the energy was a little flat, or he may have seemed a little bored here and there, and, things like that. But this show, he was like joking, having a good time, singing his ass off. It was really good to see. And for someone like me who can get jaded at a Billy Joel show, especially where there's not a whole lot of deep cuts being played, it really made the night for me because he was sounding really good. One other thing I want to mention too is how a lot of people bitch about the deep cuts not being played. And this, by and large, was certainly a greatest hit set. He did play The Longest Time, which, he has finally been playing again in the last couple years, but that was out of the set for a while and things like that. But whenever he does get to a deep cut, the crowd just goes dead or people get up.
Yeah.
And that happened this evening as well, because he did Whiter Shade of Pale, which, was a Procol Harum song.
Yeah.
I noticed it mostly between that song and Say Goodbye to Hollywood were just flat reactions. Like people really didn't know it well. I recorded Say Goodbye to Hollywood, and I was kind of near an aisle, and you could just see so many people walking by, like going up the stairs. And you better believe they weren't doing that during Allentown and Still Rock and Roll to Me and My Life and all of that stuff.
You know what the shame about that is? When's the next time you're ever going to hear Whiter Shade of Pale in concert?
Right. And it was beautiful that, between, Billy's voice was great. And, I love the organ. David Rosenthal just knocked it out of the park with that beautiful organ. Billy has only played that ever 3 times.
Whiter Shade of Pale?
Yeah.
He's done that before?
Yeah, he did it September of last year in Cincy. And he did it in Cincinnati again in 2016.
I had no idea. That's not one I would imagine him making a point of doing. I mean, I wouldn't imagine him doing AC/DC or rock and roll either, but...
The show t-shirt was a fun one, too. It was a play on the Las Vegas sign.
Right.
And it said, tonight, the fabulous Billy Joel instead of, welcome to Las Vegas. And
that sort of Rat Pack at the Sands.
Yep, exactly.
Motif, yeah.
Yep. So that was cool. But just a great show. 26 songs, including Nessun Dorma and Whiter Shade of Pale and all that. So nice set list. And I actually ducked out halfway through. You may be right.
How
and
dare
I'll tell you why. Yeah, I know. Well, one, I've heard it live.
We're going to have to suspend you for an episode.
Yeah.
I should talk. I haven't seen him live in nigh on a decade, but go on.
Well, one, I knew it was the last song, but 2, I learned from the night before the Metallica show, because we did stay through the entire show for Metallica. The way the arena's set up, everybody essentially is staying at one of the casino hotels on the Strip. Mm-hmm. And there is one way to get over there. It's one of the roads that crosses over the highway that they close to vehicle traffic that's just pedestrians to get back and forth during the show. So there is essentially one road where 55,000 people are walking from the arena to the Strip.
Yeah.
It took us over an hour to get through it for Metallica. And it was just a clusterfuck of people. So it just took forever. And Jen was so surprised, but I'm like, I do not want to sit in that again after Billy. And I'm like, okay, we're getting into the third verse, so you may be right. I know there's nothing else after this. Let's go. And we just beat the crowd. So it was definitely worth it. But yeah, I missed the last, minute and a half of the show.
But yeah, well, it's also fun that, for all the people that got up on the deep cuts, you were the one that got up on one of the bigger hits.
I know. And you may be right. It's one, I love that song. So it's like totally a song I love, but I knew that was the opportunity to get back to the hotel before the crowd.
Speaking of the crowd and Billy being in good spirits and cracking jokes, I understand he made some comments about the new vinyl release, which we're going to go ahead and cover next anyway.
He always talks about how they're always putting out stuff that he doesn't have anything to do with or he doesn't care about. And he did mention, we've got vinyl now again,
Yeah, someone posted it on the Retold page. The quote was, and this is not exact, but it was, I decided to shut up 30 years ago since I had no more to say. But Columbia Records keeps putting out these new vinyl and the red one supposedly sounds better, but you don't need to buy that shit or something like that. Billy last night.
Again, I'll draw the other parallel to Metallica. People are always like, they just keep re-releasing the albums and doing new this and new that, the same thing. And, now there's a new colored variant of this album. And, every legacy artist does it. He's definitely not unique in that respect. And now granted, I'm sure he didn't have to sign off on the Walmart release, but, he directly contributed to the vinyl box set. So he at least cooperated to some extent with that one.
To be honest with you, I was really surprised to see the Walmart set come out, not only on the heels of the box set, but also, amid the speculation that they're going to do volume 2. So it feels pretty anticlimactic, but let's get into that. Because you have them. I do not.
I do. They're right here, actually.
If you're curious to see what they look like, you can head over to our YouTube channel. Michael was kind enough to film an unboxing for us. But run us through. So what do you have there?
Funny enough, again, this is almost exactly like they did with Metallica. Metallica this time last year did 6 titles, Walmart exclusive colored vinyl. And sure enough, 6 titles for Billy. And so we have Piano Man on a tan swirl vinyl. And we've got The Stranger on gray swirl vinyl, 52nd Street on blue swirl vinyl, Glass Houses on sky blue vinyl, An Innocent Man on custard vinyl, and Stormfront on red vinyl.
Now, I would say for most of us, Stormfront would be the get, because between Stormfront and River of Dreams are the toughest to find on record right now, or at least originals.
That's definitely the one, goes like original pressing wise, goes for the most money in the secondary market. I'd say these days it'd be hard to find it under $40. So, at $26, it's certainly a more affordable alternative than trying to find a used copy, because again, they're not even that easy to find. And some of these have had other vinyl releases with, music on vinyl, mobile fidelity, and things like that. But this is the first time that these albums, the 3 from the 80s, were done on vinyl by Sony proper since the original release. And I tell you what, looking at them, I'm pretty confident 3 titles from the 70s, the Piano Man, Stranger, and 52nd Street, it feels like they may have used Edward's artwork for that.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure, but it looks very, very much like it. The 3 from the 80s are, would be in vinyl box set number 2. And so these are the first time that I've seen any kind of reissue of these from Sony. I was much more curious on, how these came out and how these looked and all that. But these 3 in particular look like really good. And it's encouraging to see that they still have the high quality original artwork and all the original files that they've used to reproduce everything, because it all looks exactly how I remember my original pressings looking.
How do they sound?
They sound really good. Nice and clean, nice and flat sounding. I think one of I don't even remember which one, maybe had a couple little pops during one song, a little noise. But it just may have been a little dirt I need to clean out. But I mean, that was the only thing I noticed over 6 albums, was like one song. And it didn't even skip. So it was just some surface noise that I can probably clean up. Really nice job with the pressings on them. The LPs themselves look very clean and very flat. Interesting color choices for sure. But yeah, just overall, really nice reproductions of these original albums. And for the last 20 years, Billy has always talked about all these reissues and how he doesn't care about it and how he's not interested. But this is what's keeping him in the public eye at the retail world. This is still helping drive selling the catalog. So, I mean, it's all good for him. And the thing of it is, vinyl is so popular lately. I've talked with friends of mine who own record stores and work at record stores. They don't even see Billy Joel vinyl pop up that much lately, because he's been so popular again in recent years that people are either hanging on to their collection or snapping them up whenever they see it. Maybe 10, 15 years ago, you would see a ton of Billy Joel in the dollar bin. Now you're barely seeing it at all,
It's something I didn't realize about Billy and vinyl in particular, that probably due in large part to the Garden residency. You're not finding vinyl as common or as cheap lately. I think I paid $10 or $13 3 years ago for a Street Life Serenade, which I was kind of fine with. It wasn't the best copy, but I didn't have it on record yet, so I went for it. And that was also downtown in Philly, where tack a couple extra dollars on every time. I'll be curious to see if the box sets and these Walmart ones end up in stores as well, secondary, used record stores and all.
Yeah, I'm curious about that as well. My only complaint with the design of these is, for some reason, and this is again what makes me think that Edward only did the first 3 and wasn't involved in the second 3, is the labels on the actual records, the coloring, like you can barely read the Columbia around the label, barely legible, where on the 370s albums, it's clear as can be. It looks just like the vinyl box set labels, the whole bit. So it makes me think that he wasn't involved in the second half of these. But aside from that, everything looks period correct and like really, really good. They also included these little 12 by 12 prints from that era in with the albums as well. So like for Glass Houses, a 12 by 12 print of him with the motorcycle there.
And that was also the cover of the You May Be Right 45. Am I correct?
You are correct, sir.
Still got it.
Yeah. So, so each of these has a print that goes along with the era. The 1983 one is a color print during the Innocent Man photo session. Stormfront has a color photo of him like leaning against the wall with sunglasses on that I remember having a poster of that same photo back in the day. And that's a nice little addition that they've included with these as well. But, overall, I'm going to give this stuff an A because it really looks good. It sounds good. There's no information as to what master they're using. Like if this was remastered or they used like the 2011 masters that Ted Jensen did for CD. Just overall very impressed. Everything looks really good, and even the spines look exactly like they looked on the originals. They really kept it correct.
Yeah, the prints are especially a treat, especially for anyone who already has the original vinyl.
As a direct result, how I was saying that retail vinyl releases and all the different things like that are certainly putting Billy a little more to the forefront. And it certainly seems to be working because Billboard put out an article today that Billy has some new sales numbers and some new Billboard chart positions as a result. So according to Billboard today, and again, recording date here is Tuesday, March 1st. So this is when this was announced. It says, Billy Joel appears on the Artist 100 for the first time since the chart began in 2014 at number 34, attributed to new releases of 6 of his classic albums. Among them, The Stranger re-enters the Billboard 200 at number 186, 7,000 units sold, up 43%, making its first placement on the chart since 1981, and it peaked at number 2 in 1978. On top album sales, The Stranger enters at number 42, and Stormfront returns at number 94.
I only heard about The Stranger. I didn't realize the rest of them made a dent as well.
Yeah, so all of those combined help push Billy back into the Artist 100, which I think is a collective chart of album sales of that artist. So it's certainly working, and people have been going out to buy it. And I tell you what, I did see, especially in the Billy Joel Retold group, a lot of people posting their photos when they went out to pick these up. So, the vinyl box set, especially when it first came out, was an expensive price point. So I know a lot of people weren't able to get it, but getting one of these at $25 a pop, or even all of them for like $150, that was a little easier for some. So I saw quite a few people picking these up, and it's certainly reflected in the Billboard charts this week.
When was the last time Billy Joel hit the top 100?
There was just a few years ago that the Essential Billy Joel hit the Billboard 200 again. It was just a few years ago. Every now and again, he'll dip back in. I'd say that was within the last 5 years, but I think this is the first time in a long time that a proper studio album has re-entered the charts. When Metallica did the same thing with Walmart in, I think it was January 2021, I want to say. They did 6 albums, and I think Billboard announced that Metallica had 5 of the top 10 albums in the country that week because of it.
Yeah, the charts are so weird now between, just everything being so fractured in terms of, not everybody listening to the same thing. And then these spates of reissues that people love to buy. It's really disrupting the charts.
Not that long ago, really, the Billboard charts were strictly either based on airplay when it came to, Hot 100 singles and things like that, or the Billboard 200 charts were strictly on physical album sales. But over the last several years, now that streaming has played a significant role in all of that, the algorithm is adjusted with how it's calculated. And so that all factors in to an album's chart position, not just a physical album sold now.
That all adds up to 2021 being a surprisingly busy and high profile year for Billy, which makes it fun now to pivot to one of his low-key years that we've covered.
I know. And that's why I'm very fortunate that we had all this new news to talk about this week, because we recorded this next segment, a month or so ago about the 2008 tour. That was originally going to be its own episode. And, well, there's just not a whole lot going on around it. There's certainly some interesting things that we were able to piece together and things like that. But, it would have been an EP of an episode.
Yeah.
Had we not piggybacked it with all the stuff we just wrapped up here. But certainly a much different year than 2022 is shaping up to be for Billy.
And so with that, let's jump right into Billy Joel's 2008 tour of Australia, New Zealand, and Japan.
We
Billy's 2008 touring was a little bit unorthodox. Most of the year he wasn't on the road, except for 2 blockbuster shows in July at Shea Stadium, which we've talked about and we'll talk about a bit today. And Billy kicked off his first tour in a bit. After the Shea shows, Billy would find himself in Korea, Tokyo, Australia, New Zealand, and places like that in November and December of that year.
It's a short run. He was pretty locked into the set lists too. My conjecture here is that since he doesn't get out there that often, he gets away with it.
Probably a pretty safe bet. He didn't get out there that often. Even though Australia was a big market for him early on and continued to be, I think after the album tours dried up, his visits out that way became a little less frequent.
And, you know, I don't see too many times where he was in Hong Kong, let alone South Korea. And he was in New Zealand also. He did one show in New Zealand here. But yeah, the bulk of it was in Australia. And by that point, even in this short tour, his set lists were pretty much the same every single night.
For most people, Billy Joel isn't the type of artist that people are going to travel to and see 5-10 times on a tour. You know, same with Elton John for a lot of people. Doesn't have the fan base of the Bruce Springsteens and the Deads and the Pearl Jams of the world, where they can go way deep every night and have radically different set lists every night, and everyone's along for the ride. You know, we've talked about it. He's just not that kind of act. The more stable set list is not too surprising.
It's a solid set list. A couple surprises here and there.
But no surprises.
Right, but no surprises. Not literally, of course. And we'll get into it when we look at it. But one song he doesn't play too often that I'm happy was in there. The notable addition this time is Christmas in Fallujah. Now, this had come out as a Cass Dillon song originally. Well, Billy wrote it, of course. Cass Dillon sang it. Came out at the end of 2007. But in 2008, as Michael informed me, even though I'm still in his spotlight and saying it here, he released it in Australia in 2008. And so this song got some mileage when he was in that country.
Yeah, I really think this was a surprising move. All along the way, he had talked about how this, to him, was a song meant for a younger singer, and that was kind of the intention. So even though the Cass Dillon version really didn't get much traction outside of the original press, I figured the song was just going to end there. But it was really surprising to see him pull out this song in a Billy Joel show here in Australia in 2008. And on top of that, Sony Music Australia went ahead and decided to capitalize that and then release it as a single.
I mean, maybe it was a test market. Maybe it was just because he was going over there. It's tough to say.
And you know what's crazy? Out of all the Billy things I have, this is one CD that's eluded me. I never picked it up when it was easy to find, and now it's quite hard to find, and I still haven't been able to locate a copy.
Really?
Yes. So if anyone out there is going to take their Christmas in Fallujah CD over to Goodwill soon, give me a call.
You know, funny enough, I'm just searching eBay for it on your behalf. Apparently, there was a release in 2005 by a group called Jefferson Pepper, who wrote a song called Christmas in Fallujah. Funny enough.
Yeah, that's not a very common title, so I'm actually surprised that Billy ended up coming up with something with the same title.
Can you believe that was 14 years ago? Times have changed.
That's equidistant between that and River of Dreams, practically.
Wow. I mean, what distinct eras from River of Dreams to Christmas in Fallujah to now?
And you got to understand, a lot of people, were clamoring for something new from Billy. And the 2 new songs we got in the mid-2000s were largely overlooked and largely forgotten in Christmas in Fallujah and All My Life.
He didn't put a lot of promotional effort behind him, but I do think that's because he was in a position where he just, got a bug to record a song for a specific reason. And I think that's just what he did. I mean, All My Life was essentially, and I kind of like the song, so I hope this doesn't sound like I'm disparaging it, but it was basically, he had the money to get Phil Ramone and go in and do that,
Yeah.
If any of us had this idea, we'd scrape together a few bucks and go to our local recording studio, probably in somebody's basement, crank it out so we had a copy of it.
Right. Both of these track with Billy's explanation all along, meaning I'm not planning on writing and releasing more pop songs or songs with lyrics, but if the mood should strike, I will go with it. He had these few one-offs in the mid-2000s, certainly nothing since. On one hand, it's too bad that neither of them did much, because I wonder if success of them would have given him a little inspiration to keep going with something, or maybe not. I don't know.
During that time when I think there just was a total dearth of good music in the mainstream, I'm kind of happy he didn't get the bug then. I would rather him get the bug now, to be honest with you. This will raise someone's ire. I'd rather see him work now with Taylor Swift than put a whole album out in 2005, 2006.
Well, what's interesting, that time was kind of no man's land for him, no pun intended.
Well done, though.
So thank you. Sony did the My Lives box set, and obviously they were still releasing some things to try to keep fulfilling the contract. But, I mean, he wasn't touring a lot. 2007, 2008, he did a couple tours. But I feel like these days, he's much more in the public conversation than he was in the mid-2000s.
The garden shows is what did it. And not only because he's doing it so often, but it's because they keep selling out. Proof is in the pudding at that point. You can't, nobody can deny whether or not he's still relevant or whether or not he's still popular. There's no way to overlook the fact that he sells out the garden every month. He's not out of the public eye long enough for anyone to wonder right now. Back then he was.
I think now he's really cemented his legacy, when it's unfortunate that it took that distance to happen, because, I mean, his body of work has always been there. So, the distance from it has only, made the appreciation grow and continue to turn on generations to Billy's music. I mean, Look at all the TikTok stuff we've talked about recently, and you got 15-year-old kids digging into Zanzibar and Vienna. They weren't alive the last time he put out new music.
There are videos of a kid playing with the Lords of 52nd Street recently, I guess at a recent show. I've scrolled past the videos. I haven't gotten a chance to go back and watch them yet, but to your point, it's catching on. It seems so obvious now, but you have to remember, this is not a foregone conclusion. I mean, think about how many artists were huge that just nobody cares about. When Springsteen sold his catalog, I was reading the Bob Lefsetz newsletter, the entertainment guru, lawyer, spokesman guy. He made the point that you just never know when your star fades. He said, look at the Doors. The Doors are just like perennially popular. I remember in the 90s, we were into the Doors. The Doors were like the stuff of legend. We loved it. I think even now, some kids get into the Doors. And then he compared them to Jefferson Airplane. Like, I love Airplane.
Yeah.
It didn't occur to me till he said it. Like, Jefferson Airplane was probably even more important and influential than the Doors at that point. But they're just not in the conversation. And you just never know when your star's going to fade. So
I blame We Built This City.
Well, I mean, that certainly didn't help. And to our point, thank God we never got We Built This City out of Billy. The worst we got was We Didn't Start the Fire. And he was like still pretty close to his prime at that point.
We built this city, we didn't burn it down.
So, with all that in mind, we're setting up this mini tour of Australia. Again, like Michael said, coming off that, historic but very brief 2-night stand at Shea. Goes halfway around the world for a handful of shows with his new timely single in tow.
We start off this run actually in Hong Kong at the Asia World Arena on November 12th. Russell Javers lived over in Hong Kong for years, and I know he had sat in with Billy on and off over the years since leaving the band. I'm curious if this was one of the times where they connected and he sat in with him. But after that, we've got November 15th in Seoul, Korea, November 18th in Tokyo, and then we head over to Australia, which is where the meat of the shows were.
I'm going to read off the set list from November 12th at Asia World Arena in the Islands District of Hong Kong, because this is almost exactly what we'll see for the rest of the tour. And we can point out the differences, kind of as we go. Right, the outliers, exactly. So this show goes Prelude, Angry Young Man, My Life, Honesty, Zanzibar, New York State of Mind, Allentown, Pressure, Just the Way You Are, Moving Out, An Innocent Man, Keeping the Faith, She's Always a Woman, Don't Ask Me Why, River of Dreams, Highway to Hell, We Didn't Start the Fire, Big Shot, It's Still Rock and Roll to Me, You May Be Right, and then the encore is Only the Good Die Young, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant, and Piano Man. By the end of the run, Scenes from an Italian Restaurant ends up about midway through the main set, and the encore is Only the Good Die Young and Piano Man. But right now, for the first handful of shows, it's at the beginning of the encore.
And again, Highway to Hell was with Chainsaw singing. This was when Billy was really starting to get into adding the cover song to give his voice a rest for, 3 or 4 minutes. And, I know a lot of people were like, come on, I want another Billy Joel song. But this gave Billy rest and helped him last throughout the show. And plus, if you saw any of these shows, the crowd just went crazy every time they brought it out.
Yeah, and you're still getting 22, 23 song shows. You're still getting a full serving of Billy here for sure. It's so funny that, people now are like, oh man, you waste these 3.5 minutes. If you kind of added up the amount of time he would spend joking and doing impressions of other musicians and snippets of their songs in any given show in the mid 70s, it's probably longer.
Oh yeah,
than the time the Chainsaw has on stage now.
One thing that's notable about these set lists, again with Billy's fairly formed band, starting with Chuck Berge joining in 2006, 2005, and we had a couple songs here that really had been out of the set list for a long time and became regulars. Keeping the Faith stayed in the set list here for a long time. Zanzibar is still played almost every night, featuring Carl Fisher.
I found it just amazing to hear like a bona fide, jazz solo happening at Citizens Bank Park in Philadelphia. I thought, just the feeling of I thought I was in Europe for a moment,
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
After that, he jumps to the Olympic Gymnastics Arena in Seoul, South Korea. That's on November 15th. This set includes The Stranger instead of Pressure, and that's about the only difference. After that, he begins his 9-show run in Australia. The first show in Australia, he opens with The Stranger, and he has My Life early in the set.
I must be seeing incomplete dates because Joel's website only lists 7 in Australia for some reason.
Once again, I'm on Setlist FM, the Wikipedia of set lists. So,
well, to be fair, I think Billy's own website isn't complete all the time either. There's some shows I've been to that aren't in the tour history. Again, this further highlights the fact that it is sometimes really hard to land on the correct information for some of this Billy Joel historical stuff. And we certainly do our best to get it right, but it's not always easy.
Just for comparison's sake, back in May, he was at the Mohegan Sun Arena in Connecticut for a couple of shows. And those shows had a bunch of deep cuts on them. A Room of Our Own is in one show. Root Beer Rag is in the same one. Summer Highland Falls, Big Man on Mulberry Street, This Night. Again, it makes sense that he goes somewhere he rarely goes, so he's going to play the hits. But it's sort of funny to see that run of shows in Connecticut where he's pulling out some stuff he rarely does and then going almost jukebox, halfway around the world.
Yeah. But we'll see here in looking at these set lists, he does pepper a couple in as the run goes.
The next 2 shows in Australia, the 23rd and the 26th, these feature Sleeping with the Television On. That's a deep cut, although it's coming up as a fan favorite now. And then this is a song I was kind of excited about. He's got Sometimes a Fantasy making its way into the sets, which is, wasn't a huge hit, but it's certainly better known than Sleeping with the Television On. So that's always a fun one.
Captain Jack make an appearance on the 23rd.
He rarely plays that outside of Philadelphia.
I'll have to look at my history. Pretty sure I heard him play it on the Stormfront tour, but not too much since then.
Especially now, he kind of says that he really won't do it unless he's in Philly. It feels like it's too long. It just goes on, but
yeah,
it goes over, man.
We're getting The Entertainer here on the 29th, and that's another song that now he plays most every night. That's right. The Soul Survivor, it seems, most of the time from Street Life Serenade.
Although Root Beer Rag also was on the 23rd.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
And, that's so funny because, so the story goes, he's convinced that he did well in Australia over time because they did not release Street Life Serenade over there.
Right. It went right from Piano Man to Turnstiles.
Yeah.
And Turnstiles was a big hit there.
I'll interject here because this now that we're in Australia, this would have happened here. There's a bit of, gossipy stuff about Billy and Katie Lee, his wife at this time, that seemed to have, occurred during this tour. Getting this from Fred Scher's Billy Joel, a Definitive Biography. Kind of started a little before that when he was playing the benefit with Springsteen for President Obama. So the story goes, Katie Lee, per Billy's invitation, stopped by with some girlfriends. They were all, quote, young, pretty, vivacious, but there was a feeling in the room that they acted like upper-class debutantes visiting the hired entertainment. And somebody said, like, they were just, the whole group of them were being very patronizing about it, so it was sort of a weird dynamic between Billy and his wife at that point. So that happened about a month before this tour.
And then also back in March of 2008, Billy was on Oprah with Katie, and she had, I believe, a new cookbook coming out, and he, from all accounts, begrudgingly agreed to do this to help her out, and clearly seemed uncomfortable with it. It just was not his vibe. I haven't watched it in years, and I remember watching it when it aired, and I just could tell it was like fish out of water for Billy. He just was not comfortable.
Which is funny because we just talked about how comfortable he was on Letterman and even with Rosie O'Donnell 9 years prior.
And I think part of it might have been the circumstances. He wanted to help her out, and it's like she was kind of not using him to get on Oprah, but it seemed like a weird situation where had they not been married, there's no way she would have been on Oprah promoting a book.
Well, what's funny about this is that she's asking him about the controversy around Only the Good Die Young. It's like, that was 30 years prior at this point? Like,
bit of an outdated question by this point.
Yeah. And I mean, again, contrast that with what we had just watched when he's like bantering with Rosie O'Donnell and David Letterman, and they're keeping it pretty current, and
right.
If they're reaching back, it's Rosie talking about, oh yeah, I used to stalk you or whatever else.
Right. And, even too, like over the last 10 years, whenever he's been on Stern, I mean, Howard now just asks some really insightful, interesting questions that Oprah's not going to come up with.
This is a point too, where like he wasn't never seem that interested in really putting himself out there like this anymore. So
yeah, he did it for her. Clearly it just seemed like an uncomfortable situation. And I just remember kind of feeling bad about it because it just seemed like a disconnect all the way around between everybody.
After the Oprah appearance, after this, sort of faux pas at the Obama fundraiser, the plan is for Katie to go with Billy to Hong Kong, Tokyo, and everything. She brings her mom along, and then Billy and Katie are supposed to spend a couple free days at the Four Seasons in Bali, which is known for having, really romantic atmosphere, quote, discreet service, a real nice kind of couples getaway sort of thing. But right before that, Katie Lee decides just to go home. We're not sure if there was something that had to do with something she wanted to do for work, or if there was because there was apparently some thunderstorms moving in across the flight path. This kind of sucks. She leaves, and then Billy goes to Bali sort of by himself in this like romantic, romantic atmosphere, just on his own. Sort of sounds like the character from I Don't Want to Be Alone Anymore.
Right.
to be honest with you. Like that, that's sort of, I haven't talked about hapless Billy in a while, but this is sort of like hapless Billy come to life right now.
One of those sad romantic comedy movies, except Billy didn't find somebody else and fall in love when he went there by himself.
Yeah. Well, funny enough, before Bali, they all stayed at the hotel from the film Lost in Translation.
That's funny.
There's not too much more to say. The set lists stay pretty consistent. At most, he just sort of maybe shuffles a few songs around here and there. Towards the end of the run, we get I Go to Extremes, Everybody Loves You Now makes an appearance. The Ballad of Billy the Kid comes in for two or three shows here. And of course, the only other thing is Christmas in Fallujah, which he hasn't played live in a long, long time. Probably will never again. I think both because it really didn't do anything, and also it's just so locked in an era. Goodnight Saigon is never locked in an era, even though it's so distinctly about Vietnam and written in the hangover of Vietnam.
That one feels so much more universal of the Brotherhood of Soldiers.
He was very much more writing out of his element on Christmas in Fallujah. So in the middle of this run, we get a review, and I don't think this is like in a paper. I think this is just a blogger. This is at thedailyvault.com.
It's in the vault.
It's in the vault, Jerry.
It's a vault.
And it's The Angry Young Man Down Under. That was a horrible accent, but I'm leaving it in. Billy Joel live in Melbourne. This is dated December 1st, 2008. It says 2 years ago, Billy Joel brought his first solo tour to Australia after almost a decade. The shows sold out fast, real fast, and a great time was had by all. He is currently back down under with pretty much the same show. The only difference being that he has dropped some later songs in favor of his earlier works. Skip ahead a little here. I was struck by the small stage and its rather simple settings. No screens, no pyrotechnics, no risers, just like the old days. The stage was barely big enough to house the band and BJ's grand piano. That's an interesting observation, that it doesn't seem stripped down or he's doing it on the cheap to this writer. It feels like when he used to see him.
Yeah, which is interesting. I mean, I feel like there would have been some risers for the band. Ever since the early 80s, they've had some sort of a tiered stage. So I'm curious what this production was.
This could be me getting it wrong. I felt like no risers meant more that like nobody was coming up from out of the floor sort of thing. But
Possible.
I could be wrong. Risers could just mean that. But at any rate, a little after 8 p.m., the lights went out and Joel rose from under the stage, seated at his highly polished black piano, the spotlight hitting him as he pumped out the distinctive intro of Angry Young Man. So now I don't know if he was on a riser coming up and I'm completely wrong, or if he just came up the stairs. The band was as tight as ever and Joel's pipes are still in fine form. His ability to showcase his complete vocal range within a few lines is a rare talent. Joel's easygoing nature made for great in-between song banter about his life and career, and he even downplayed some of his biggest hits. The entertainer made an early appearance, as did his ode to the Big Apple, New York State of Mind. The only real surprises of that night happened in the beginning with a stunning reworking of Sometimes a Fantasy and the ethereal Summer Highland Falls, while the majestic scenes from an Italian restaurant sounded as inspired as ever. Well, now I'm really curious. Now this part's interesting. Allentown, She's Always a Woman, and Zanzibar are all given extended workouts that kept them sounding fresh and vital as ever. Which, Zanzibar certainly, lends itself to some extended soloing from Carl. Couldn't imagine what gets extended on Allentown or She's Always a Woman. But this is a tour where we really didn't find any footage anywhere. Joel then offered to drop a dud so whoever needed a bathroom break wouldn't miss anything. Some folks got up, but soon turned back around in a hurry as the opening chords of his seminal love song, Just the Way You Are, filled the night air. Having released no new material in 15 years meant the set list was absolute gold from start to finish. The only exception was his recent song, Christmas in Fallujah, which found BJ up front on rhythm guitar. He's pretty good too. He then gave the lead vocal duties to Chainsaw, who belted out Highway to Hell. He stripped down It's Still Rock and Roll to Me followed, with BJ giving his best Elvis-style vocals a workout. The only songs post-82 that got an airing were his massive 89 hit We Didn't Start the Fire and the almost as big River of Dreams. Both were giving rocked-up arrangements, while the latter contained the verse and chorus of Soul Man for good measure. Moving Out, Anthony's song, appeared deep into the set and almost brought the house down, but of course the one that created near pandemonium was Piano Man, which he closed the show with in style. The crowd sang it with him in full voice, and Joel rose to the occasion to deliver one of the strongest performances of the night. Funny to hear because we know he's pretty much sick of it by now.
Right.
So more than 2 hours after it began, BJ made a fast exit, and as all the pros do, left us wanting more. He gave his all and then some, proving that age has not wearied him nor his canon of hits that contain some of pop's finest songs ever. The staggering thing is that when the list of songs he didn't do is as long as the set list itself, then you begin to realize the legendary status he enjoys is not accidental or sentimental. Far from it, in fact. All in all, it was a great show by a great showman, and I can't wait for next time.
This brings up a couple points that I didn't notice as we were going through the set list. One, on this particular night and much of this tour, he's only playing 2 songs after the Nylon Curtain. River of Dreams and We Didn't Start the Fire. There's you see I Go to Extremes pop in, a couple here and there, but it's largely those 2 songs. That night in particular, he's not playing hardly anything off of An Innocent Man, other than Keeping the Faith early on.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that album doesn't get a lot of traction live.
It depends. I mean, Uptown Girl.
That's true. But for an album that spawned off as many hits as it did, it's just Keeping the Faith and Uptown Girl. I mean, clearly you'll hear almost anything off The Stranger. You'll hear most of Glass Houses, handful of 52nd Street.
These songs are among the hardest for him to sing.
Well, it's the hardest to sing, and he also had the most people on that. The biggest horn sections, all these people doing background vocals. It doesn't sound like the other Billy Joel albums, I mean, we've said many times they all sound different, but that one really an anomaly in some ways.
And it's worth noting too, after he and Elizabeth broke up, he was still playing Just the Way You Are and She's Always a Woman and the songs for her. But it seemed like after Billy and Christy split up, he kind of put a halt to a lot of the Innocent Man stuff for a little while. And now they clearly seem to have a good relationship again, which is good to see. And, they've come back around to be friends. But I feel like for a while it was kind of dicey. And for some reason, he just wasn't playing a lot of those songs.
Innocent Man comes out every once in a while, but when was the last time he did Longest Time? And so that pretty much brings us to the end of this tour. It was, sort of a blip on Billy's radar. Nothing too revelatory here. Perhaps just the fact that this seemed to be the signpost of the end of his marriage with Katie Lee. I'm sure that that botched vacation or that botched getaway played a role.
The 2000s were certainly a big up and down time for Billy personally, so it's really hard to tell where his frame of mind was at. But by all accounts on the single review we found, the shows were great. The band and he both sounded good, so certainly some good performances were had out there. And it's just interesting how this was such an outlier in this year that there really, there was a good chunk of the year where there was nothing happening, but to do this 4 to 5 week burst of shows was pretty interesting.
Yeah. So that's all we have. And now it's time to see just how many of our listeners are coming in from the other side of the world. Anyone from Australia, New Zealand that saw these shows, let us know what you thought. Anybody else have memories from this time? Just even seeing Billy on Oprah or any of those shows in the States, if you can share your memories of what the shows were like, what you could sort of make of his demeanor at that point. It seems like there's much more footage available of his activity in the U.S. than there is for this tour. So, anything you guys happen to know helps us fill in the blanks.
Put it into context, 2006 and 2007, he was touring the U.S. 2009, he was back in the U.S. doing the face-to-face tour again with Elton. So I'm kind of surprised that there wasn't more international touring this year. It was just this run of shows. So I'm curious what was behind all of it. Did he just have a couple offers come in and they strung together a tour? And I always wonder, when you have an album out, that's a little more typical and predictable. You have an album out, you plot out a tour. But when there's no big marketing release, no big album to anchor a tour around, these things just kind of happen. And, these days it's like shows and tours can kind of run into each other because they're not so much anchored by a moment in time like the albums are.
We've talked a lot about the early 2000s were a really dry time for him. But, 2006 saw 12 Gardens live. So even before there was an album out, there was just a historic run of shows. And then there was an album out. So there was, sort of a reason to get back out there. And then there was Last Play at Shea, and that was an event. And this sort of begins a little bit of a dry spell for him in a way before the Madison Square Garden residency. I saw him in 2009 and it was a great show. I saw him with Elton.
But after that Elton tour, it pretty well dried up, and he was pretty dormant in 2010 and 11, and even 2012 up until that 12-12-12. What was it? The Hurricane Sandy show?
Yeah.
Where he and the band did like half hour or whatever at this benefit and brought the house down. A lot of people say that that's really what got Billy excited again about it. And the rest is history. I think everything built from that night. So that was the 2008 tour. Some interesting set lists along the way, but he certainly settled into some familiar territory with the sets. So I would say probably one of the biggest things to come out of this 2008 tour was the Christmas in Fallujah song, which Cass Dillon recorded, but Billy played on this run and released as a single in Australia. That was the last time an original Billy Joel rock song ever came to fruition that any of us heard. So that certainly makes this tour pretty interesting for me.
And now, as always, we're going to kick it back to you. We got plenty to talk about this time around. Chime right in. Send us your Instagram. Slide into our Instagram DMs. Send us a Facebook message or a comment. Or just be old fuddy-duddies like us and write us an email. Who was at Billy Joel in Vegas? Who was at Billy Joel and Metallica in Vegas? Did Michael jump in the pit and he's just not telling us? I want reports. I want photos if possible. I'll pay top dollar.
I was mixing it up in the circle pit during Zanzibar. That shit was heavy.
People.
Do you like your music heavy? And do you want heavy right now? Good, because Metallica gives you heavy, baby.
Oh man, no! Once that flugelhorn break comes on, I go insane.
That's perfect. All right, now here She's Always a Woman.
Yeah, mend your wounds. Everybody go back to your wives. Yeah, so let us know, and who got the vinyl? Who gave it a spin?
Yeah.
Did anybody notice any audio changes, any improvements, any deficiencies? Hey, if you just got into vinyl and you've been listening to Billy on Spotify and YouTube, what's that experience like, making the leap back to analog, even though I'm sure it's digital to analog, but it's still a wider frequency range? And of course, what do you remember from 2008, which, unless we hear from somebody on the other side of the world, I'm going to guess none of our stateside listeners were at any of these shows. But all the same, give us your thoughts. You did make a couple TV appearances, things like that. Hit us up, as always, glasshousespodcast@gmail.com. We're on all the socials, at Glasshouses, a Billy Joel podcast. And when you're done pouring your hearts out to us, please, by all means, pour your hearts out on Apple Podcasts, if that's where you're listening to us. Give us that 5-star review and that gushing positive review. Every 5-star rating and gushing positive review tells the algorithm that we are a podcast of merit and should be put in front of more people. It's the most fun I've had exposing myself to people that hasn't gotten me thrown in jail.
Yeah.
You just wait till we make the leap to video.
Oh boy. It's going to be a very interactive show then.
Sweeps week. All right. Well, that's all I got. How you feeling, Michael?
Yeah, I'm feeling good. It was a whirlwind. This is a Tuesday night for us, and I got home Sunday night. The Vegas thing is still rattling around in my head. It was a whirlwind weekend, and I'm looking forward to digging back into these vinyl records, and it's a good time to be a Billy Joel fan in 2022. There was a couple dark years where there wasn't a lot to say, wasn't a lot to talk about, but seeing these great shows happening, these really cool vinyl releases, and who knows what else is on the horizon. I know they're planning on probably trying to do quite a bit for the Billy Joel 50 campaign, the 50 years of Billy. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some really cool things along the way in 2022. So we'll definitely be covering everything as it comes down the pike. So stick with us. It'll be a lot of fun.
So Michael's going to go drop the needle, and we'll see you next time.
We'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone.